Now, just these past days, we've been experiencing cold weather conditions which came out with heavy rains and flooding in some areas. And we're being told that we're currently in an El Nino period. But what does this actually mean? And most importantly, for agriculture? Well, helping us understand is agricultural economist Wandile Sihlobo this morning. And Wandile, thank you so much for joining us. A very warm good morning to you. I think for the benefit of clarity and understanding, what does the El Nino period actually mean? And how does it then, significantly affect or impact on agriculture?
Good morning, Tumelo. Thanks for having me on. So, Tumelo, you will recall that we're coming from about 4 years of really good rainfall in South Africa. And that was a period where we called a La Nina. Whenever we are in La Nina, we expect at least to see above normal rainfall in South Africa and in the Southern Africa region. So whenever then we switch to go to an El Nino, it's typically that period where we could expect to see below normal rainfall or even harsh drought in some years. You can think back, for example, in 2015-16, where we had one of the difficult droughts that was an El Nino. In 2018, we did have a mild one. So this time around, the weather forecasters are telling us that we are in an El Nino period, which is where then we can expect to see below normal rainfall. But I think all of the news are changing in the near term. We're beginning to see the South African Weather Service painting a much more better picture, because an El Nino typically would be negative for South Africa's agriculture, while La Nina would be positive for the agricultural sector.
Right. So right now, as it stands, is our agriculture sector and industry in the country safe from the negative impacts or the negativity that comes with an El Nino?
We are now, Tumelo, at a time of planting in South Africa's agriculture for summer grains and oilseeds. That is your maize, soybeans, sunflower, and all of those crops. We usually begin planting them on the eastern side of South Africa from around about the beginning of October and going throughout the year. But what has been beautiful about this year is that although we are in an El Nino, which typically is something we don't like, we were benefiting from soil moisture, which is really at good levels from the past few seasons, 4 consecutive years of rainy seasons. That was really good to support the farmers to start planting. But last week, the South African Weather Service came up with this report in its seasonal climate watch, where they are saying, look, guys, you may actually be in a situation where you get good rainfalls till possibly somewhere around about February, March next year. And now, if then that materializes, that means that although we are in an El Nino, which would typically be negative, but this time around, it may be different and we could be able to get good rainfall. But they're saying these rains will only be good in the central and the eastern sides of South Africa, while the western regions of Northwest and the others will have some good rainfall. So we worry about those regions. But I would say in totality, the South African agricultural sector, we are much more optimistic on our side to say, look, that this current season that we are in going into next year may actually not be as bad as some people may have feared.
Right. Those regions that you mentioned of that you may be concerned about, are there any alternative measures that can be taken for relief?
I think, Tumelo, at this point, it's still super early in a sense that that's what we are watching, but we're not really seeing some bit of damage. And I mean, even with the conversations with farmers, they are upbeat. I mean, I was just in Truckstop the other day talking to the guys, and they were like, look, we are upbeat and we will be able to continue to plant. And the data is also showing us that, Tumelo, if you look at what we call farmers' intentions to plant, that's when farmers are surveyed across South Africa to say, what are you planning to plant for the 2023-24 season? They, in fact, expect to plant 2% more in the area that would be cultivated. They think they can plant their summer crop in about 4.5 million hectares. That's up 2% from the previous season. With these, and by the time they were releasing this, it was before these improvements in rainfall, because about 2 weeks ago, we were all thinking there could be moderate good showers until the end of this year.
Right.
But now there's new updates they're saying until next year. And the critical time, Tumelo, that I want to emphasize is that you want to get good rains at the start of the season for seeds to germinate. and somewhere again during pollination, which is when crops are flowering. After that, even if it can dry up, you pretty much be safe. And I think in South Africa, much of the flowering of the crop, what we call pollination, is usually around about February, end of January. And that's within this cycle of rainfall, which is why we are optimistic about the season ahead.
I think also optimistic is the farmers themselves. I mean, if the feedback you're giving us with your engagement with the farmers is anything to go by, one thing about farmers and producers, Wandile, is that they're quite resilient, they're creative, they think ahead, they don't allow conditions, weather predictions, tearing in the negative, they don't dwell on it, because when you dwell, then there are losses with dwelling on the negative. It seems like farmers have to constantly reinnovate and find ways to mitigate whatever challenge that comes before them.
Absolutely. And I think this year in South Africa, it's also a reasonably better in a sense that even on input costs, the fertilizers, agrochemicals, if you look at the prices of those, they are down by 50% compared to last year. So we're planting in an environment where the input costs are also not as harsh. But again, to the point you're making, that there is resilience amongst the South African farmers, and we do think that we'll have a good agricultural season, which then, if you are a consumer watching this, it also means that you don't really have to worry about the availability of food supplies or anything. And one shouldn't hear an El Nino and think back in 2015-16 when we had livestock dying in much of the country. I don't think we will see that with all of the evidence that we have at hand at this point.
That's the good news we'd like to hear. Thank you so much, Wandile, for speaking to us right here on Newslink. Wandile Sihlobo, agricultural expert, joining me right here on Newslink regarding the El Nino period, saying that, of course, South Africans, consumers particularly, do not have to worry about food production.